So it seems like we're all getting rug pulled. I have a sneaky feeling it's inflation that's taking advantage of us. But what exactly is inflation?
There are two kinds of inflation. There's inflation due to unfortunate acts of God, force majeure. So if the monetary system is being run perfectly, and if there's a tornado or a hurricane, and there's a temporary shortage of goods and services, then prices will go up. And so that is physical inflation. But there's another form of inflation, which is monetary inflation, and this is much more common. And this is generally the source of 98% of inflation in the world, the vast majority of it. And that's when all of the goods and services and assets in a society are priced in a currency that is in and of itself inflationary. So if I price things in the dollar and I double the supply of dollars, the supply of houses doesn't increase, but the supply of dollars does increase. Therefore, the prices will probably double over time.
Typically, especially if you're going through a hyperinflation, wages do not keep up. They do not keep up. And so inflation eats into purchasing power. You can't buy enough to feed your family.
The average income in this country is $5,000 less than the average cost of living. The cost of basic human needs, food, shelter, and transportation is now $5,000 more than the average person makes, which means if you're in that category, which is most Americans, you now cannot make ends meet.
Here in the United States, they target 2% inflation. They're literally saying we want to steal about 2% of your purchasing power every year. And then we have years like this where the inflation rate is 7 or 8 or 9% higher than normal. That means they're just stealing our purchasing power even that much faster. So there's no honest unit of account for them. It's just a credit-based system. They're just making different numbers on their spreadsheets and they say, you know what, we're going to create this much more credit this year. We're going to destroy this much more purchasing power. And it's the citizens of the country that pay for that. We're paying for our government to make irresponsible decisions. So yes, I think that's very immoral.
At this point, it's getting very difficult for people to catch up. We're seeing more people working multiple jobs just to make ends meet. We see more dual income households. There's less households where you just have one person that works and one person that stays home and runs the household and the family. Now everybody's working.
So let me get this straight. We take our God-given talents and work really hard, and our money buys us less and less every year? I don't like the sound of that. So how does government create money?
We print it digitally. So we as a central bank, we have the ability to create money digitally. We also print actual currency and we distribute that through the Federal Reserve banks.
The current financial system was built for the elite. It was built to ensure that those that control institutions and have a vast amount of money can make even more profit at the expense of regular citizens that are from the working class. The current financial system was designed to promote the wealth of a minority, which is why that minority tries everything possible to discourage people from using Bitcoin, because they know they will end up losing that privilege they have been carrying for centuries.
So we can't trust what we create. So it's not hard to see how we go from this to a world where a lot of people just don't even know how much they are worth to the world. And that makes it easier for the bullies of the world to step in and say, you know what, we'll tell you how much you're worth.
A person who gives themselves to honest labor and gives an honest day's work deserves a wage that will allow them to sustain their lifestyle at a basic standard. And if that's not happening, then we have a problem in terms of the way our economic structure works. And there are a lot of people who work multiple jobs in order to meet that standard. And that is probably an indication that we have a problem. It's not good stewardship to put myself in a position where I acquire so much debt that I can't sustain my living. And we have people who are doing that all the time, and we have people who in some ways promote the idea that you can live this way.
The incentives exist for the Fed to provide extremely cheap credit to banks and for them to mark it up a little bit because it's profitable for them, and then to offer that credit pretty cheaply and essentially create, debt slaves or indentured servants out of every American. and anyone else around the world that they can lend to that is plugged into the Western banking system. That's just the incentives of the system that we have today.
So was our monetary system designed to siphon away wealth from the working class?
If we go back to medieval times and perhaps a bit earlier, we can see how money emerged. What happened is that every local sovereign nation state or city-state tended to issue its own currency. And two things impacted the reliability, the durability, and the effectiveness of that currency. One was whether the issuer of the currency, whether it was a nobleman or a king, or whether it was a constituted government, whether they could, to use the phrase from Isaiah, to resist the temptation to dilute the currency. And it is a huge temptation. There's no question about it.
I like to use a silver dollar as an example. So when this dollar was created, right, it was worth $1. As a matter of fact, for a while, you could take a U.S. silver dollar note and exchange it for $1, right? So this used to be $1. Today, I just checked, and it takes $38, paper dollars, Federal Reserve note dollars, to buy $1 of silver. That gives you an idea of the destruction of the purchasing power.
And that's why we're seeing today in the post-lockdown world, all the central banks around the world printed tons and tons of money. And that just doesn't make any sense. And so people say, well, why are housing prices going crazy? And why are food prices going crazy? Well, it's inflation. It's actually not really inflation. Inflation is when there's excess demand for limited supply, so the price rises. This is currency devaluation.
So weights and measures were the way in which you'd say, if I got a pound of something, I'll give you a pound of this, or the equivalent. And there's a real warning in the scriptures, Deuteronomy, Leviticus, especially in the Mosaic Law, and then later in the book of Isaiah, the book of Proverbs, that talk about things like, and they use a lot of metaphors, like diluting the wine with water. I mean, how is that for an image of inflationary policy, where you inflate the amount of money in the economy because you have control of the printing presses?
Unfortunately, as governments abandon all morality with respect to preserving the value of the currency for which they exercise control and responsibility, it's increasingly impossible to count on that kind of stability. And in that light, we think in terms of whether Bitcoin is an investment vehicle or whether it is an exchange vehicle, or maybe we have to look at it as both.
There's no actual mechanical difference at all between you and I putting together a dollar printing machine and spinning up some counterfeit $100 bills and trying to go out, take those into the world and trade them for goods and services. There's no difference in you and I doing that and what the Federal Reserve does by the trillion. It is one of the core contributors to the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer.
The particularly egregious thing about fiat currency is that it can cover up theft in the name of policymaking. Whereas electronic currencies based on algorithms can't do that.
If you think of the average citizen, it is very hard to plan your life. If I don't know what the central bank is going to do next month, let alone a year from now, 5 years, or 10 years from now.
I use the example of baby boomers, right? Baby boomers, when we were young, we thought $500,000 would be a perfectly good amount of money to retire on. And now, suddenly, it looks like $500,000 is nowhere near what you really should have to retire on. Well, the reason for that is the systematic destruction of the purchasing power of those dollars. So that makes all baby boomers and all citizens more dependent on government. And that's very good for government.
So not only are people unable to retire, they can't even get their life started.
God's will is for us to be fruitful and to multiply. And one decision or one factor that impact many people's decision to have children is their finances. And the state of our economy has really devastated, particularly young people's savings. And I have a ton of friends who have decided not to have children or not to have more children because they feel like they can't afford it. So I do think inflation can impact some people's decision on if they want to have children or not. And I think that's a really sad thing.
I have experienced this in my life. I have put off having a family. I've wondered if I'll ever be able to afford a home. More and more people in my generation are living at home with their parents and drowning in student loan debt. Millennials like me are losing hope that the future is one they'll be able to afford. For the first time, we have a generation that is worse off than the ones who came before. None of it feels fair because it isn't. The system is rigged against us.